Well, earlier in the show, we were chatting with Diamond Dante DeCaria, excuse me, who teaches little kids pitching and thinks he knows all about pitching, and says that Trey Savage is going to have a short career. We'll get to that maybe a bit later. But there was a lot of optimism with the state of the Blue Jays starting rotation, and we knew that Shane Bieber wouldn't be ready right away, but everything else was supposed to be okay, and now it looks like it's maybe falling apart. What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, you think about where just things were, Brendan. I mean, this was supposed to be the deepest part of the team, you know? Obviously, Kevin Gausman, opening day starter, and you think about the postseason that Max Scherzer had. They give Dylan Cease all that money, but then one by one in spring training, it's just been an arm falling, another one dropping, and then last night, Cody Ponce, who comes over from Korea with grand fanfare and the 3-year contract, a non-contact injury. First, he slipped off the mound a couple of times, but then a dribbler to his left towards the first baseline, a non-contact injury where he needed to be carted off the field. The Blue Jays are calling it a strain to the ACL, which is probably not what it is. It's probably a tear. It probably is. To what extent is it a tear? How long will he be out? Months, not days. Just brutal. Just brutal for him coming back to North America to pitch, coming back to the big leagues to pitch. And then from the broader standpoint, Barrios on the injured list with the dislocated elbow. You Savage with the shoulder issue that you want to get into a little bit later on. Shane Bieber, who knows what's going on with his elbow. And now this. Yikes.
So who's going to pick up the slack here? I think Scherzer starts tonight, if I'm not mistaken. But like, who's going to pick up the slack? Who do they have?
Well, I mean, there really isn't a next man up in the minors. They'll call up a name. But the pitcher, Brendan, to me, that I've never really understood what's going on here, because he bailed them out throughout last season when they were really in the depths of despair. And then the World Series, the postseason rolls around. They didn't really use Eric Lauer much, and they kept kind of discarding him. And then when they really needed him in that 18-inning game in L.A., here comes Eric Lauer out of the bullpen and gives them bulk, gives them quality innings. He gave them a terrific start on the weekend. And now Eric Lauer, yet again, is going to be asked to come in and deliver and do work for the Jays. You know, they took him to arbitration. They said a whole bunch of terrible things about him in arbitration coming into this season. And all this guy has kind of done is perform. And now at a time where they really need something, they look to him again.
They're going to have to lean on him for a while, but still early. I don't make too much of the record. It's what did Sparky Anderson say? You win 60, you lose 60. It's what you do with the other 40. But 3-1. What do you think so far?
Yeah, there's also a Jim Leland line, and I like this one a little bit more. He said, basically be 500 at the end of May. Be 500, be healthy, and then with 100 games to go in the season, that's when your real. Let me try that in English. Your year really begins, and I think there's a lot of merit to that. We're now at a point where, everybody gets into the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. But it's the month of March still. There's no need to be looking at the standings. There's no need to be really looking at much other than the injury report, and make sure you don't fall too far out of the race. Because look, at the end of April last year, the Blue Jays were in bad shape. At the end of May, there was an argument to be made that maybe Ross Atkins and John Schneider don't survive this. And it wasn't until they went lights out in July that the entire season turned and they end up getting to Game 7 of the World Series. So at this point, it's about, let's get pitchers eating up innings. Let's try and get healthy. Let's get guys having quality at-bats, and then just take it from there.
Sometimes I kind of ask myself the question, how much fun is this really beating up on the Athletics when we know the Jays have such a big payroll, and then you realize, well, the cleat's been on the other foot for so long for so many of these fans. Let's just enjoy it while the cookie crumbles in our direction or whatever.
And not just that though, Brendan. Remember, every single win counts the same, whether it's March 31st or August 31st or September 21st. So you just want to make sure you don't find yourself too far out of the race, and you want to make sure that you're in some kind of conversation. So that's a real important part of all this.
I remember, what's his name? John Sherholtz, longtime GM of the Atlanta Braves. He always said that he kind of had his own rule that he wouldn't make any moves till after 60 games. So, yeah, they're important, but you don't want to be knee-jerk either. You're not just a Toronto guy. You're very much into Canadian sport, and there was a bit of news that you want to talk about from yesterday that has a hook to the Olympics and youth sports.
I think this is one of the great stories of 2026, that a university basketball coach from Canada just got hired in the pros. So Carly Clark has been the head coach at TMU, formerly Ryerson, for the last 14, 15 years. Prior to that, she was at University of Prince Edward Island. A woman from Halifax who went to a small university, played basketball at Bishops. She has been hired by the new WNBA franchise in Toronto. Now, in my lifetime that I can remember, there have been two coaches on the men's side that have gone from youth sports to the pros. Roy Rana left Ryerson at the time to coach overseas. Scott Morrison from Lakehead ended up coaching in the G League. Now he's on the bench with the Utah Jazz. And now here's Carly. They won a national championship 4 years ago at TMU. She's been on the national team kind of pathway as an assistant coach for the Olympic team. She's a head coach for like the U19 under 23 teams. She's just continued to work away at her profession. And after all this success, is now a professional basketball coach. I think that's really cool.
Do you think this will open doors for more Canadians to get to the pros, whether it's the WNBA or the NBA itself?
Yeah, it could. It could. But here's the interesting part. I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday about the NCAA. And Brendan, their point to me was, that's pro sports now. And it is. It really is. Like, there is a cornerback from the Université Laval, played for the Rouge et Or, all-Canadian corner, last couple of years. He just got $200,000 US to go to Colorado State to play there next year. So, like, he would be the highest paid non-quarterback in the CFL to go be a corner at age 21, 22. So coaching that, you're coaching professionals now. Okay, they're still, I mean, some might be in school, but that's what it's become. Everything's free agency. There is no draft, et cetera, et cetera. So what professional sports now means, Dave Smart's down at the University of Pacific right now. I won all those national championships with Carleton on the basketball side. It's just going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds and what really unfolds.
Yeah, kind of depressing to think that if we're going to keep getting good players in the CFL, some of these guys are just going to have to bite the bullet and take a pay cut if they're going to come north to Canada. And not everybody's going to want to do that, but that's a whole other discussion. One more thing I wanted to add. I read an article, I think it was The Athletic or wherever, that there was concern about the WNBA labor situation that might delay the opening of the Toronto Tempo. And I've been excited to watch basketball in the summer. Are we still concerned about that we might not see the Tempo start when they're supposed to?
No, they ratified their CBA last week, so that finally got completed. It got finished. There's major salary increases for the players. Obviously, the league and the owners won, but that has been cleared. I believe April 5th, April 6th, something like that. Sometime next week is going to be the expansion draft, and then the regular player draft. What's interesting about that whole labor situation, Brendan, is that most of the players, knowing the CBA was expiring, had their contracts all expire at the end of last season, most of them, which means that coming into this offseason, the majority of the players are free agents. So it's going to be a free-for-all when it comes to spending. Toronto has a chance to be competitive out of the gate if they want to be, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to be interesting to watch and, to see how this all unfolds in free agency as much as anything else.
I think it's kind of ridiculous that we didn't have a team in Canada or in Toronto for so long, and I don't want to give Larry Tannenbaum too much credit, but I guess he has done things to bail out the Argos, and now I think he's still with this initiative, so maybe we'll give him a little bit of credit for doing this. Okay, now that we've talked about all the important stuff, I guess we'll talk about that hockey team that fired their general manager yesterday. Brad Treliving is out as GM of the Maple Leafs. He had a year left on his deal. Doesn't sound like too much of the Toronto media is surprised. What do you think?
Not surprised that it happened. I'm surprised by the timing. I'm surprised that you would allow a general manager to go through the trade deadline, all of 25 days ago or whatever it was, only to now exit him now, which is what this organization kind of did on the basketball side. They let Masai Ujiri do the draft, and then they dismissed him after that. We can get into the resume of what worked, what didn't work. Treliving didn't make this hockey team better. His trades, especially at the deadline, Brandon Carlo, asset management wasn't strong, and all of it. It was a warranted hockey decision. The timing of it is very peculiar, and it just seems that this is a franchise that just continues to spin its wheels. First it was Kyle Dubas out, and then Brendan Shanahan out. Now Brad Treliving out, to say nothing of all the coaches over the years. And it's wild, Brendan. They were this close to being up 3-0 in the series against Florida in the second round last year. And now look what has happened since. It's wild.
Yeah, crazy how the wheels just spin off over one move. I think about that a lot, that Game 3 in overtime against the Florida Panthers, how history could just be totally different for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But at the same time, I remember Don Hewitt having Mark Steven from Calgary on this very program right around the time they were figuring out whether Treliving was going to get extended in Calgary. And his response was, well, I mean, he's fine. They're all fine at their job. But you asked the question, are the Flames any closer to their goal of winning a Stanley Cup today than they were when they hired him nearly a decade ago? And I think the answer would have to be no. I think the same is true for the Toronto Maple Leafs. There was just no difference maker. They were missing that Anthopoulos difference maker when Anthopoulos was making the big trades and at least got everybody excited. And I don't know that that's his fault, but it just didn't seem like it was changing things. What about Doug Armstrong?
Irony too,
go ahead. Yeah,
just real quick. The irony of all of this is that the Florida Panthers knocked the Toronto Maple Leafs off with Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett leading the way.
Right.
And Brad Treliving traded away from Calgary to Florida, and it burned him then and it burned him again.
No kidding. Worked. No kidding. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, that's a really good point. Right. And I don't think for a second if he had a different last name, if he would have been the GM of the Maple Leafs, but that's a whole other discussion too. What do you think of the Doug Armstrong rumors? Is there a fit there? Do you think it's going to happen? I mean, it seems like we go through this period where there's a rumor that maybe they'll hire Brian Burke, and then eventually it happens, and then there's speculation they're going to hire this whiz kid Dubas, and then it happens. Do you think there's anything to Doug Armstrong going to Toronto?
Yeah, it's so hard to know. I mean, here's a guy from Sarnia, won a cup, obviously, with the Blues, and you just don't know. Keith Pelly, the grand poobah over there at MLSE, his line today was, "This is the most important hire," and he's right. And he said the next GM will make the decision on the coach. Now, obviously, Armstrong and Berube have worked together before, won a Stanley Cup together before, on and on it goes. But I would have to believe that the timing of this is, let's try and get a little bit of a head start on casting a wider net to talk to more people. There has to be a large element to that. Now, is Armstrong somebody they'd want to talk to? Probably. He just resigned from Team Canada. Why is he doing that? Probably because, he wants, just in case. So Whether or not it happens, I'm not sure. But I mean, he's going to be top of the list that they're going to want to talk to.
Do you think they're at a point where they're going to have to blow up the roster? Like, are they heading into another rebuild here, or do you think that this is still savable, where you still build around around Matthews and just try to reload, take another run at it? Or are we past that point?
One of the issues that Brad Treliving inherited, and then Brad Treliving piled on, is that he inherited a pile of no movement clauses, and then he added a bunch more himself. So this roster is not working. This core is not working. Who knows what's going on with the health of Austin Matthews beyond the MCL that he just had surgery with? He hasn't been the same for the last 2 years. They haven't had a quality goaltender in forever. On we can go. I just don't know how movable some of these pieces are going to be unless you go to guys and just say, this is what we want to do. So, you kind of shrug your shoulders right now and wonder, the next person that comes in, how are you going to clean up this mess?
I remember Brian Burke crying about that when he took over. He said there were so many no movement, no trade clauses, and he said, well, it's not that I would never do one, but I don't like these. And it always astonishes me how it seems like the Leafs end up with so many of those. This is one of the prime franchises, one of the premier brands in North America in sports. That's kind of a failure on the part of management, isn't it? That they have to give out all these no movement clauses to get players in or get them re-signed.
I think that's a big sign of just where things are today. Matthew Tkachuk has one. Sam Bennett has one. Barkov has one. Nobody talks about it when you win. And the failure of management to need to do it, I think that's just the cost of doing business a lot of the time. If you really want the player, and especially if it's a free agent, you gotta do what the player wants to do. The players run the show these days.
That was kind of like when people were asking Brendan Shanahan about them being so tight against the cap. He says, I think fans should just get comfy with that. It just is what it is. And he's probably right on that front. And again, they win that game 3. It's a totally different story last spring.
And here's the other part. Brendan, if you're not tight to the cap, fans will then say, why are you being so cheap?
As they should.
Why aren't you spending to the cap? Right. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
That's right. This is great. We still have time? Yeah. Dante DeCaria he's worked a lot in I don't think you know Dante. He's the voice of the Regina Pats, but he's an Ottawa guy, and he's done a lot of minor league broadcasting with, I think, the Lansing Lugnuts and other teams. He will confess to anybody who will listen that he is a much bigger baseball fan than he is hockey fan. He talks to Dustin Mulliken, who I'm sure you're familiar with. They think that Trey Savage is always going to have injury problems because of his delivery. Has that thought ever entered your mind? Do you have any thought on that?
I don't have a thought on it. I don't know. I know nothing about the human anatomy and the shoulder and how this is all. It is so unicornish. His delivery, his style, his mechanic, etc. On top of that, they asked Savage to go through 5 different levels of pro ball last year, throwing the most innings he's ever pitched in his career. That all can, weigh into it. I mean, I don't know enough about how the human body works. Look, the most unorthodox anything you can do in sport, regardless of sport, on the elbow ligament is throw a baseball 95, 98, 100 miles an hour. It's a ticking time bomb before it pops. And then you think about everything else that goes into it, shoulders, etc. Dante will appreciate this story. Mulliken will appreciate this story. And I think you and the listeners and viewers will too, Brendan. I remember a few years ago talking to Kevin Gausman. And I asked Gausman, I said, what have you learned about arm, elbow, shoulder care? Because you haven't really been on the injured list much with injuries like those. And you know what Gausman told me? He was looking for different things to try in different sports, to try and get different ideas of different workouts. And he's scrolling on Instagram one day, and somehow a feed comes up from a world champion javelin thrower. And he begins watching javelin, this javelin thrower, Yoenis Veta. And he's like, a lot of what this guy's doing mimics what a pitcher does. So he DMs Veta out of the blue, introduces himself, and then they start exchanging messages back and forth. And Veta started talking to him about different javelin exercises that he does and whatever, which has now taken off so much stress off of Gosman's shoulder, arm, elbow in warm-up and activation, whatever, and it really actually activates his lower half because of the push-off that you need, which mimics kind of what a starting pitcher does. So javelin and baseball, that's something that Kevin Gosman picked up and has helped keep his arm, shoulder, elbow healthy and intact.
I totally respect that outside the box thinking, and I guarantee you that javelin thrower was stunned to get a call from Kevin Gosman and really appreciated that. It kind of makes me think of Russell Martin when I think he was training with Paralympic athletes, like just totally outside the box. This is great. We're going to talk again on Thursday, but I want to talk about some Argo CFL stuff. I'll text you and we'll talk about it on Thursday.
I look forward to it. See you, bud.